Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. A high court in London saying that the Brexit referendum of last June is not enough. You also need a vote in the British Parliament. That's going to be appealed to the UK Supreme Court. We're talking about it in the company of Paul Thompson, Vice Chair of the British Conservatives in Paris. From London, Jeremy Smith, barrister and co-director of Prime Economics, the think tank. Also joining us, Tom White, former UK trade negotiator. And we're pleased for part two to welcome from London, Lucy Thomas, former deputy director of Stronger in Europe. Lucy, welcome to the show. What did you think of the ruling?
Well, I thought it was interesting. I mean, I'm not wholly behind this process because I think people did democratically vote to leave the EU. That is clear, and we absolutely have to respect that. But I think it's odd that there isn't, or there wasn't, going to be a process in Parliament, particularly when the Leave campaign spent the whole time saying we need to get control back for Parliament in the UK. We have to have sovereignty. So it's weird that they're now a little bit scared of MPs having a debate and having a vote on these things, because actually, you know, they are elected. They are our elected representatives. So why not let them debate and let them have a say?
Lucy, at the outset, we were mentioning how across Europe there's this sort of push for more referendums more often. Here in France, one of the presidential candidates, Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president, likes that idea. Italy's five-star movement is in favor. Do you think referendums, after your Brexit experience, they strengthen or undermine democracy?
Well, I think, obviously, given the result, I personally and my colleagues found it pretty bruising, and it was a very difficult campaign. And given the way that it went, I think the one lesson that I take from it is that referendums aren't actually on the question on the ballot paper. And I think we have to be really, really careful in unleashing certain forces and anger, frankly, when we ask these questions, because, I mean, I, like many of my colleagues, got a lot of abuse during the campaign and it got pretty nasty. And we saw in the weeks following the vote real racism actually coming back to this country, people saying to EU migrants and any immigrants, frankly, you know, when are you going back? We voted to get rid of you. So I think we have to be really careful in making sure that if we do hold referendums, and it's right to give people a say on things, that we are sensible and moderate in the debates, and also that they are fact-based, because I think all of the Leave campaigners now have distanced themselves from one of their main promises during the campaign, which was that we will get £350 million back every week and we can spend it all on the NHS. Now, there's not one Leave campaigner who will now stand by that promise. So it's pretty disappointing that actually a lot of people voted to leave the EU because of that promise, which was blazoned on the side of a bus. You know, it was a really big part of the campaign. So for it to be essentially a lie, you know, again, that's just really disappointing.
All right, so the panel as a whole here, respecting the will of the people, but still feeling a bit of bitterness on the hashtag F24 debate. One comment, I voted Remain. The people have already voted, and Article 50 should be triggered sooner rather than later. It's not just in London, by the way, that there have been court initiatives. Northern Ireland's High Court dismissing a first legal challenge over Brexit, ruling there is nothing in the 1998 Good Friday peace agreements to stop the government from triggering exit negotiations with the EU. However, the court last week in Belfast forwarding the substance of the arguments to the courts over in London. The Prime Minister earlier this week doing her best to assuage fears over the Northern Ireland peace agreement and trade for a region of Britain that banks on EU subsidies.
I can absolutely assure the honourable gentleman that we're determined, first of all, to get the best possible deal on exiting the European Union for the British people. We're looking at the various sectors. We're very conscious of the importance of the food and agricultural sector across the United Kingdom, but obviously particularly of the importance of that sector to Northern Ireland. And we will be doing everything we can, first of all, to listen to the representations made by the Northern Ireland Executive, but then to ensure we get the best deal possible for our agri-food sector.
Chairman Smith, do the Northern Irish have a strong argument against Brexit?
Well, to be honest, I haven't studied the Northern Irish case in the same depth. The Irish situation as a whole, as we know, is extremely delicate. But I think there were very special arguments in their case. So I'd prefer not to get myself deeply into the Northern Irish case.
All right, Paul.
But Northern Ireland is precisely an example of where an ill-thought-out question on an ill-thought-out referendum has left the situation in what is frankly going to be a dangerous situation.
Paul Thompson, you agree?
I don't agree with that last characterization. No, not at all. But to go to the decision on Northern Ireland, I did have a quick look at it. I can't say I've studied it in exhaustive detail. I think the comment to be made this evening is simply that it does indeed focus on issues particular to the status of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom, and therefore, although the result went the other way because the attack on the exercise of royal prerogative in that particular case was rejected, the legal issues in debate were completely different in nature from the more central issues dealt with in the decision released today.
All right. England.
But Enda Kenny, the Prime Minister of Ireland, has really expressed his concern both to the British and to the European partners because they fear desperately the Republic being squeezed in this really difficult situation. And it has to be said that the question that was put on the ballot on the referendum paper ignored all of these constitutional and practical difficulties downstream. So to answer the question on referenda, it depends on the national tradition for them a lot, and Britain doesn't have much of a tradition. But what we've got to learn is that both the legislation and the questions have to be a lot more intelligent than the legislation and the questions we've had on this occasion.
England and Wales for leave. The Northern Irish voted 55% to remain. That number climbs to 62% in Scotland, where separatists have on and off raised the spectre of a second independence referendum since the last vote in June there. For Scotland's First Minister, the ruling could expose what she calls chaos and confusion at the heart of Theresa May's government.
I mean, we should remember that their refusal to allow a vote in the House of Commons is not some matter of high constitutional principle. It's because they don't have a coherent position and they know that if they take their case to the House of Commons, that will be exposed.
Tom White, this uncertainty that we're heading into, does it mean that the government will have a chance now to hone its strategy? Will have more time, basically?
That's true that it will potentially give a forum for debate in the Parliament. I think the comments from about the devolved administrations, both in Scotland and Northern Ireland, though, do bring home the importance of this being a national project, and it's fairly common in EU negotiations that where there are devolved matters being handled, that actually the Scottish or the Northern Irish, or in some cases the Welsh governments, have a role to play in that. And I think that's very important as you look forward at the negotiations themselves. And in some ways, this is a little bit of a red herring about giving everyone a role in deciding whether to start the negotiations. What's really important is that they are involved in scrutinising and holding to account decisions as they are taken in the negotiations as they go along. And certainly, when you look at the relationship between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, it becomes very important to remember that we've had special arrangements in the past. For example, both being outside the Schengen Agreement and having a common travel area, Irish citizens having additional rights in the UK, for example, around voting, and this absolutely has to be taken very seriously. And the importance of involving the Scottish Government and the Northern Irish Government to make sure also that any final agreement is also seen as legitimate in those countries to avoid the risk of further breakup.
Tom, news of the High Court ruling sending the pound surging, a 4-week high against the dollar, above €1.12. How do you explain the market reaction? Are the markets happy that actually, again, this buys time for Britain if there's a legal wrangle?
It's more potentially that it gives Theresa May a counterpoint to the pressures that she's been under for the last few months. And I think if you look at her conference speech, which was a major factor in the pound's further fall during October, that was clearly required by her to consolidate her position among Eurosceptic Conservative members and some key ministers. And by having a counterweight from the Parliament, perhaps requiring that she seek the closest possible relationship or continued single market access will in some ways potentially be helpful. However, I would go back to what I said at the beginning, that there's quite a strong risk that she ends up with an undeliverable mandate that stops her being credible with her counterparts.
Paul Thompson, at this point in time, is it mission impossible for this government to come to a consensus between a soft and a hard Brexit? You heard Lucy Thomas there arguing that it doesn't seem yet like the government has a plan.
I don't think that's a very good question, but I think that what one needs to realize is that there are two different levels, or maybe more than that, that are key here. One is, what are the real goals that Theresa May has set for herself and for the government? A distinct question is, what negotiating tactics does she wish to use to try to work towards that goal? Everyone recognizes.
But we don't even know whether she wants a soft or a hard Brexit at
But
this
she
point.
perhaps does. And my whole point is that it's not in her interest.
Does the public have the right to know?
It's not in her interest as a negotiator to.
Does the public have the right to know what kind of Brexit she's negotiating?
Well, the one that's debatable, but she would say, and she has said several times, that she would not give a running commentary on negotiations, and she has also said that it's an open process. I would just like to comment on the exchange rate, if I may. I think the traders in these foreign exchange markets are rational economic agents. Their reasoning, I'm virtually certain, will be that the result of the decision, assuming for a moment that it is confirmed in December again, will be something in between a hard and a soft Brexit, or maybe closer to a soft Brexit, and in any event farther away from a hard Brexit. And from their point of view, that will strengthen the British
Okay, so you're
economy,
saying that
and that's why the pound has gone up.
So they're reading the tea leaves and seeing that it could mean that the final decision will be closer to a soft Brexit. Of course, that's anyone's guess. Lucy Thomas, your reaction to what you just heard from Paul Thompson, that, well, we're entering a negotiation phase. You've got to play your cards close to your chest. Do you agree with that? Or should the government be spelling it out, whether they want a hard or a soft Brexit?
Well, I think going back to what people voted for, they voted to leave, but they certainly didn't vote for a specific plan. So there is no mandate for a hard Brexit, a soft Brexit, or anything else. And I think given that the details weren't spelt out during the campaign, it's perfectly reasonable that there is a proper open process about what that negotiation looks like. However, I agree that the more you show your negotiating hand early, the harder it is then to do your bargaining. So there has to be a bit of a trade-off there. I think it's perfectly legitimate that before they go into those talks, that Parliament and that the British people do have a sense of what they're opting for. And let's remember that the European Parliament is going to get its hands on negotiating papers, so they will be leaked as quickly as they are delivered in Brussels. So I think we've got to be a bit realistic, and if our EU counterparts are aware of our negotiating position, I think it's only right that our Parliament and that British people should have a sense. And one thing I would just highlight is that the Nissan situation, where they've basically been given a promise by the government that they won't be adversely affected by whatever trade arrangements we have. Now, I think that's
and they're
really
building new models in
Sunderland. It potentially shows you that exactly, and that they are confident enough on the basis of what the government has promised them that they will continue their investment here, which was in question. The chief executive was very clear that he needed guarantees before he could guarantee those investments. And so what we're seeing here is that the auto sector is being told there won't be tariffs, and if there are, there will be some form of compensation, whether directly or indirectly through research grants, for example. So that is an interesting insight into the way the government is looking at this. OK, that's the auto sector. It's a major employer in this country, very important sector. What are the other sectors that they might face pressure from, and what might they say to them? And are they actually approaching the negotiation in that kind of a piecemeal way? And then I would say the next sector is financial services, because that is huge for our country. It contributes a huge amount to the exchequer, and they have a massive issue in passporting whether they can trade across Europe freely or not.
Oh, Tom White, I've got to turn to you because you're the trade negotiator in our midst here. First of all, do you agree that about playing your cards close to your chest, or do you agree with Lucy Thomas that the answer's already been given in the way they've dealt with the auto sector? It's going to be more of a soft than a hard Brexit.
I think certainly most sectors of the economy would hope for a softer Brexit, and I think the difficulty with looking at individual sectors is that until you've actually started talking to the EU 27, you don't know what price they want to extract for continued market access. I think it's interesting that the government felt confident enough to give some assurances to Nissan that it would be able to deliver a zero tariff deal, because they could look at the interests on the other side and see that also the EU car industry would have an interest in exporting here without tariffs, and they could be reasonably confident about that. Whereas for something like financial services, where actually the barriers tend to be around regulatory requirements, consumer protection, investor protection, that is much, much harder to predict and to be honest, to be optimistic about. And that's why Treasury ministers have been quite clear that that will be much, much more difficult to deliver. And the financial sector, for all of its size and scale, has received no assurances of the kind that were given to Nissan.
Oh, Jeremy Smith, do you agree there that hoping to keep all the big banks in the City of London is a bridge too far?
Yes, and I don't think this is credible anyway. My own view is that if you want to remain with the so-called four freedoms of people and capital and services and goods, then you're much better to remain a member and to have a say in all of the creation of those rules. And otherwise, it's very hard to see this halfway house that everyone's talking about, and nor do I see the European Parliament, which has to give its consent, and many of the other players are willing to budge on very much at all. And that once the Article 50 notice is given and the 2 years start to run, especially as half of it will be taken up with elections in France and Germany, very little time is going to be left for those negotiations. So I see little but a hard landing. I mean, that's a separate point from the fact that the City of London has over-dominated the British economy to the damage of manufacturing and others through the over-financialisation of the economy. But that's a big other story.
And just very briefly, because we're almost out of time, Jeremy. Very briefly, because we're almost out of time.
No chances of the EU partners wanting to let the city off the hook.
All right, very briefly, because we're almost out of time. I want to go around the room. Just your prediction: when will the Brexit negotiations, that so-called Article 50, that triggers the negotiation, begin? I'll begin with you, Jeremy Smith. Your prediction.
Well, I mean, said March, but this could be deferred. It really depends on the legal ones. In my view, the later the better, unless the economy started to get into serious difficulties, because once you've given that notice, you lose most of your bargaining position.
Tom White, in one sentence?
It has to be completed by the 2019 elections, and I don't see UK MPs blocking the actual triggering, so I think March at the latest.
Lucy Thomas?
Yeah, I think probably for those reasons, the hard end has to be before the European elections 2019. However, I think it's a massive waste of time to do your negotiation while the French and German elections are going on.
Paul Thompson.
I also agree that it will be in March. I don't think that the existence of the French or German elections is relevant, and at least the British government has decided they don't want it to be relevant. I also note that Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, has agreed to stay on until June 2019. Financial and political actors consider that's very important in ensuring a smooth process throughout this 2-year period, and I think that will be a strong additional incentive, along with everything else, for the government to stick to the schedule of launching the process in March, and it will do what it has to in talking to various people, including Jeremy Corbyn, to get things on the rails at that point in time.
All right, Paul Thompson, I want to thank you. I want to thank Lucy Thomas, Jeremy Smith, Tom White in London. Thank you for joining us here. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to our own James Creedon.
Hi, François.
James, what's your sense? Is there, because again, it was a tight vote, right? 52% for, 48 against. Are people over the vote in June?
Well, I would say on social media it's as divided as the vote was, but perhaps a slightly more number, a slightly higher representation of people who are happy to see the Brexit issue back on the table. You can see here one person indicating that the popcorn is coming out as people look at the fury of those who are in favour of Brexit. And you can see messages such as this one: message to all MPs in Westminster: if you defy the people and stop Brexit, I promise you will be sorry. And with the number of people who voted in favour of Brexit in that particular infographic. Democracy is dead if the MPs get their way. Slightly misspelt there, I think. And then over at the Daily Mail, which was in favour of the Brexit vote, they are talking of a betrayal. Elsewhere, they speak about unelected activist judges who are mounting a power grab. And they go on to talk about one of those judges who founded a European law group, European in capitals, which is obviously a bad word now. Another charged the taxpayer millions for advice. I'm not sure what that's about. And the third is an openly gay ex-Olympic fencer. So clearly some sort of utter clown type figure, according to that depiction. Anyway, moving on to the fact that the Tory government is planning to appeal this judgment. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, is considering actively opposing the Tories' bid to appeal. So you can see that this is set to get quite tense in the UK political spectrum. I quite like this tweet. My absolute favourite thing about the Article 50 debacle. So if it is appealed, according to one theory, the government could appeal it so far as the European Court of Justice. Now, that would be somewhat
Paul Thompson doesn't think
ironic.
that Theresa May will be going before.
I don't think so. I think it would look a little bit strange. Now, the best sentence of the last 24 hours vis-a-vis all of this is Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson saying, "Brexit means Brexit, and we're going to make a titanic success of it." Now, he said this at
I was scratching my head when I read that.
And I actually listened to the audio just to be sure that he didn't say it as an actual gag. He didn't. He said it, not essentially realizing that there was a serious flaw in that image. And he corrected it to colossal afterwards. He said a colossal success. In any case, for Reuters here, you can see they had a headline: "Gaffe-prone Boris Johnson hits an iceberg." And others who are clearly want to support Boris Johnson responding to that, saying, "Don't you know that a Titan is a character from Greek mythology? Titanic means big and strong," except, of course, it also has other connotations
Especially in Belfast.
Yeah, indeed. And so here we have lovely little infographics, photoshopped imagery commemorating that particular quote, and it's become a hashtag Titanic success. I could show you some others as well. There you go. Brexit, Titanic. Hashtag Titanic Brexit. What else do we have? Now, obviously, the prospect of an early general election is also being mentioned on social media. The Telegraph is talking about the fact that if indeed the Parliament will be having a say on this, then perhaps Theresa May could call snap elections. But here you have somebody who is delighted with the decision, because, of course, they are also expressing themselves on social media. Thank God for the UK judiciary. Brexit needs a parliamentary vote. Just a quick whip through some final tweets. If you're not happy about the Brexit court decision, the easiest way is to let all MPs know by joining UKIP today. So you can see that the whole debate has sort of been relaunched again. I am deeply furious. Patriot, 52% may need to take to the streets. I'll finish with this News Thump satirical article. Man who demanded sovereignty of Parliament outraged by sovereignty of Parliament. Because, of course, the whole point of Brexit is that the Parliament would have the final say. And here they may have the final say, and that is infuriating some and making others giggle. Or write satirical articles.
It all depends whether you're on the 52% or the 48% side of it. Many thanks, James Creed. And I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.